I didn't say a word. Not when my mother clinked her glass. Not when she smiled at the table full of people I hadn't seen in years. Not even when she looked right at me, right through me, and said what she said. My name is Claire Beaumont. And for most of my adult life, I was the daughter nobody mentioned unless they had to. I'm 31 now. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ontario, the kind of place where everybody knows which family you come from and what that family is supposed to mean. My parents had been together for 34 years. My father was an accountant. My mother ran the household with the same precision she applied to everything else in her life. The Christmas cards went out by December 1st. The lawn was edged every second Saturday, and the family's reputation was maintained with a quiet, relentless vigilance. I was the second of two daughters. My older sister, who I'll call by what she was to me, my sister was born 3 years before me, and had, from what I could gather, arrived in the world already knowing exactly what she was supposed to become. She was pre-med by 17. She graduated from Queen's University with honors. She became a cardiologist at a hospital in Toronto. At family gatherings, my mother said her name. The way people say the name of a place they've always dreamed of, visiting slowly, with reverence, like the syllables themselves were worth something. I became a baker. Not the hobby kind. Not the she makes nice muffins for the office kind. I mean, I dropped out of my second year of business school at 21, moved into a basement apartment in Hamilton with a used stand mixer and about $800 in savings, and I started selling things. Cookies at first, out of a cardboard box at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. Then cakes. Then wedding cakes. Then corporate orders. Then a small commercial kitchen I rented by the hour. Then one I leased. Then one I built out myself with a loan I spent 3 years paying down. But nobody in my family knew any of that. Not really. They knew I did something with baking. They knew I didn't have a salary or benefits or a pension plan. They knew I hadn't finished my degree. Those were the facts that mattered to them. And those facts had calcified into a story about me that nobody ever thought to question. My mother had a way of introducing me at family events that I came to recognize the way you recognize weather changing. There was a slight pause before she said my name. A particular kind of smile warm enough to pass as pride if you weren't looking closely, but with something underneath it, something that said, "I'm doing my best here." "And this is Claire," she would say. "She bakes." Not Claire runs her own business. Not Claire has been self-employed for nearly a decade. Just, she bakes. The same tone you'd use to say she knits, or she likes puzzles. A hobby. A pastime. Something to fill the hours. I had learned, over the years, not to correct her. It didn't help. The one time I tried, I was 26. At my cousin's baby shower, I said, gently, that I actually had a commercial kitchen now, and had done 43 wedding cakes that season. My mother had nodded, and then turned to the woman beside her and said, "She's always been so creative." The conversation moved on. I did not. What I didn't understand for a long time, and what I eventually had to sit with very quietly on my own, was that my mother's version of me served a purpose. It kept the hierarchy intact. If I was just the one who baked, then my sister was still the undisputed achievement of the family. The proof that my parents had done something right, and I was what? The footnote. The cautionary tale she referenced when she wanted to scare the younger cousins into taking their education seriously. My sister and I were not close. We were polite to each other at Christmas and Easter, the way people are polite to someone they've agreed to tolerate indefinitely. She never asked about my work. I never asked about hers. We had, over the years, developed a mutual understanding that mostly involved not making eye contact for too long. What I didn't know, what I found out, only later, and only by accident, was that my sister had said things about me, to our parents, to relatives, to mutual acquaintances, little things, casually delivered observations that had a way of settling into people's minds and staying there. That I was irresponsible with money. That I was doing okay, I think, but you know how she is. That the baking thing was sweet but not really sustainable. She never said anything outright cruel. She didn't have to. She was precise about it, the way a cardiologist is precise about everything, finding the exact spot to apply the least pressure for the most effect. I know this because one of my oldest friends, a woman I had gone to high school with, who later became my part-time accountant, told me. She had been at a dinner party. My sister was there. My sister didn't know the connection. My friend called me the next morning and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not spiral." I spiraled a little. But not for long. Because by that point, I had learned something important about myself, which was that I do not do well when I'm angry, but I do extremely well when I'm focused. And learning what my sister had been saying for years did not make me angry. It made me focused. I had been running my bakery, Beaumont's, I called it, nothing complicated, for 8 years by then. I had 5 part-time employees, and 2 full-time ones. I had a commercial kitchen in the East End of Hamilton, and a small storefront that I had opened the previous spring. I had a contract with 2 hotel chains for their banquet catering. I was in the middle of negotiating a wholesale arrangement with a regional grocery chain, which, if it went through, would put my products in 62 stores across Ontario. Nobody in my family knew any of this. I had stopped volunteering information years ago, and somehow, none of them had asked. The wedding was my cousin's. She was the daughter of my mother's brother, and she was getting married in September at a venue outside of Barrie, one of those converted barn properties with string lights and a catering tent and a guest list of about 90 people. It was a Saturday. The ceremony was at 4. Dinner was at 7. I drove up alone. I had thought about bringing a friend, but I decided against it. I don't ace. Maybe I wanted to face it cleanly. Maybe I was tired of using other people as buffers against my own family. I wore a dark green dress I'd bought at a boutique in Westdale. I'd had my hair done that morning. I looked, I thought, like someone who was doing fine. Which I was. But I also looked like someone who had put some thought into the day. Which I had, though not for the reasons anyone would have assumed. Dinner was seated. I was at a table with my parents, my sister and her husband, 2 of my mother's sisters, and 3 people I didn't recognize, friends of my uncle's, I gathered, or colleagues of the groom's family. One of them was a woman named Renata. She was somewhere in her late 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of quiet self-possession that reads immediately as someone who has been in charge of things for a long time. I didn't think much about her at first. I was focused on getting through the meal. My mother had been in good spirits all day. She'd cried at the ceremony, the good kind of crying, and she'd had a glass of wine during cocktail hour, and she was warm and social in the way she could be, when everything was going according to plan. I watched her work the table during dinner, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, steering conversation with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for decades. Then my uncle's wife leaned over and asked my mother, quite genuinely, to catch her up on the girls. "I feel like I haven't heard anything in ages," she said. "What are they both up to?" My mother's face did the thing it always does. The warmth, the pause, the management. "Well," she said, "my older one," and she talked about my sister for a solid 2 minutes. The hospital, the research, the conference she'd recently attended in Vancouver, the condo renovation they were doing in the annex. She was thorough and enthusiastic, and I watched Renata listening with polite interest, and I cut a piece of my chicken and ate it. Then my mother turned slightly toward me. "And Claire," she said. "She does baking." It wasn't malicious. I want to be clear about that, because I've spent a lot of time being clear about that to myself. It wasn't designed to wound me in that particular moment. It was just the story she'd been telling for so long that she didn't even think about it anymore. Claire does baking. Like a fact of nature. Like the lake is cold in February. I smiled. I didn't say anything. I picked up my water glass, and I took a sip, and I let the conversation move on. Renata, though, looked at me. Not in a pointed way. Just she looked at me the way someone looks at a sentence that doesn't quite parse. Like her ear had caught something. She waited until there was a natural break in the conversation around us. And then she said, conversationally, not to anyone in particular, but clearly directed at me. "What kind of baking?" It was such a simple question. I had not been asked that question, by anyone in my family's orbit, in longer than I could remember. Pastry, mostly, I said. Cakes, custom orders, some wholesale. I have a bakery in Hamilton. Renata nodded slowly. Storefront or production? Both, now, I said. We opened the retail space in April. Before that, it was just the commercial kitchen. How many years have you been operating? 8. 9 in January. She set down her fork very slightly. And you do wholesale? We're in the middle of a contract negotiation right now, I said. Regional grocery chain. 62 locations. The table had not gone silent. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't a movie moment where every head turns and the room goes still. It was quieter than that. It was more like a shift in atmospheric pressure. My mother had stopped speaking mid-sentence to my aunt. My sister had gone very still in the particular way she goes still when she is recalibrating. Renata looked at me for a moment, and then reached into the small clutch bag beside her plate and produced a business card. She set it on the table and slid it toward me. I'm on the board of a hospitality group, she said. We have 11 properties across Ontario and BC. We've been looking for a regional pastry supplier for our Ontario hotels for about 6 months. Someone local, someone with production capacity. She paused. Would you be open to a conversation? I picked up the card. Yes, I said. I would. My mother was looking at me. I could feel it without turning my head. My sister was very carefully cutting something on her plate. My aunt, who had asked the original question, was looking between me and Renata with an expression I can only describe as recalculation. I did not perform anything in that moment. I did not smile triumphantly. I did not look at my mother. I put the business card in my small evening bag, picked up my fork, and went back to my dinner. The rest of the evening moved the way evenings do at weddings, speeches, first dance, the particular loosening that happens after the cake is cut, and people get up to find the people they actually wanted to talk to. Renata and I spoke again later, for about 20 minutes, near the edge of the tent. She asked good questions. I gave her honest answers. We shook hands before she left. My mother found me near the end of the night, while I was standing at the edge of the dance floor watching my cousin and her new husband move through the crowd. She stood beside me for a moment without saying anything. You never told us, she said finally. About all of it, the stores, the contracts. I thought about that for a while before I answered. You never asked, I said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. She didn't say anything. I looked at her then, and I saw something on her face that I hadn't seen there before. I'm not sure what to call it exactly. Not shame. Not quite. Something smaller and more complicated than shame, the particular expression of someone who has just noticed that the story they've been telling no longer matches the available evidence. I'm proud of you, she said. And I think she meant it. I think in that moment she genuinely meant it. And I also think that if I had told her everything 8 years ago, she would have found a way to minimize it. And I'm not sure she would have meant it then. Thank you, I said. My father, who had been nearby, and had clearly heard at least part of it, put his hand briefly on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. My father rarely said anything. But he kept his hand there for a moment longer than necessary, and that, from him, was something. My sister left before I did. She said goodbye from a distance, a small wave across the tent. I waved back. We would have to sort through all of it eventually, she and I, the things she'd said, the years of quietly administered diminishment. That wasn't going to happen at a wedding in Barrie at 11 o'clock at night. But it was going to happen. I knew that now, with the kind of certainty that doesn't feel dramatic, just settled. I drove home that night with the windows down. It was one of those September nights in Ontario where the air is still warm, but there's something underneath it, a first suggestion of what's coming, the way the province shifts gears slowly and without apology. I had a 3-hour drive and a voicemail from my business partner that I didn't listen to until I was back in Hamilton. He had some questions about the grocery chain negotiation. Nothing urgent. I would deal with it Monday. What I want to tell you, and I know this is the part you've been waiting for, the resolution, the lesson, The thing that makes the whole story worth something is that the meeting with Renata went well. Very well. We signed a preliminary agreement 6 weeks after the wedding. It's not the grocery chain. It's better, actually, because it's consistent volume at a higher margin, and it came with a relationship that has already opened 2 other doors I didn't expect. My 7th full-time employee starts next month. We're looking at a second production kitchen. But that's not actually what I want to tell you. What I want to tell you is something I understood on that drive home. With the windows down and the highway unspooling through the dark, I had spent years waiting for my family to see me. Waiting for the moment when the evidence would be undeniable, and they would finally look at me the way my mother looked at my sister. I had, without fully knowing it, arranged my entire inner life around that waiting. And what I realized, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, is that I had been succeeding for years before they noticed. The kitchen, the employees, the contracts, the early mornings, and the hard months, and the decisions I made alone in a basement apartment with a used mixer and $800, none of that required their acknowledgement to be real. It was real before anyone at that table knew about it. It was real when my mother was telling strangers I did baking. It was real the whole time. The recognition at the wedding didn't make me successful. It just made them aware of what I already was. And maybe that sounds like a small distinction. But I've been thinking about it for months now, and I don't think it is. I think it's everything. I think about the people who will never have a Renata moment, who work hard and build something real, and never get the table at the wedding where the right person asks the right question. And I want to say to them, and maybe to myself, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, last year, that the absence of witnesses does not make the work less real. The quiet is not the same as failure. You don't need the room to go still to prove that you are worth taking seriously. You already were. You already are. You don't have to wait for them to see it.